Hello, everybody. Let's talk about The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn Trilogy, the original Mistborn Trilogy. There has been another series in this world, but yeah, the original trilogy is this book. Then we have book 2, The Well of Ascension, and book 3, The Hero of Ages. And today I'm reviewing the first one, The Final Empire. So this world is based on the premise that the prophesized hero who was supposed to save the world failed, and now this Dark Lord, called the Lord Ruler, is ruling this world, and he rules from the capital city called Luthadel. And in this world we have a two-class society. We have the nobility and we have the peasants, who are called Ska in this world. What we know is that people who from noble blood can actually have a magical power called allomancy. And with allomancy, basically you have the ability to either burn one kind of metal that gives you a specific power, so you consume that metal, and then you have the ability to burn it. And when you burn it, a specific kind of power that is related to that metal is available to you. And people who have this power are called mistings. And there are some very rare people who can actually burn all the metals that are available to allomancy. People who can actually burn all metals are called Mistborn. In this story, we follow our two main characters. One is Vin, who is a street urchin, and the other is Kelseys, who is the leader of a thieving crew. And Kelseys, along with his thieving crew, is planning a heist that is supposed to overthrow the Final Empire and thereby the Lord Ruler. So this story has actually some really nice and visual world building. Like, we get this picture of the fact that there are regular ash falls in this world. Every night we have this like mists that go about. Yeah, we have in general a very like visual description of how this world looks, and you can really picture it. Also, the main characters in this book are really interesting. They go through some really cool character development in this book, and we also have some interesting and fun side characters. What I personally think is the best part of this book is the plot. So I have already read Elantris, which is the first book Brandon Sanderson published. I will link my review for that in the info cards above. Already in that review, I said that the plot is what the main thing that Brandon Sanderson is talented in was. And I would say that this is clear here as well. Yes, his character work and his world building work improved in this, which is his second released book. But I would say the plot is still very, very good. I would say it's maybe even better than in Elantris. And yeah, this book doesn't get boring at any point, in my personal opinion. So I had some pacing issues with Elantris, but I didn't have them here. Now that may be because I read this book pretty fast, so maybe I just didn't notice if there were pacing issues. But I personally really wanted to read this book all the time, and I wanted to finish this very quickly. So for me personally, the pacing was quite good, and I wasn't bored at any point during this book. Another thing I would like to praise is the implementation and usage of magic. So this is a very hard magic system, so we have to learn a lot of rules that we like, how this magic works and how it is related to the nobility. And yeah, I feel like the way that Brandon Sanderson implemented this and conveyed the magic system to the reader is very, very interesting, because the way he does it is a mentor-apprentice relationship between our two main characters. Through that, the reader gets to learn this magic and its rules, which is very cool. And yeah, maybe that can be a bit dry. I personally really enjoyed those passages where we saw this like training with the magic. And what I really loved were that the battles that implemented the magic in this world were really awe-inspiring, and they were visually very accessible. Like the way Brandon Sanderson writes his battle scenes, you can actually visualize, like it's almost like a movie in your head where you can actually see what is happening, which I find is really, really cool. And it really it immerses you in the story in a very nice way. A few negatives I had. One, the side characters don't get a lot of character development. So we have two main POV characters, which are Vin and Kelseys, and those two get quite a lot of character development, and I really like that. But the other side characters, they get some, but most of them don't get a lot of character development, and that may be because we don't have them as a POV. But I personally feel like that's something that could be improved upon in the follow-up books. And another negative I had was that there were slight plot conveniences at certain points in this book. None of those really annoyed me, like they didn't take me out of the story. But like a few days after I read it, I realized, okay, yeah, that at that point, like I had a few questions why something happened. But when I was reading this book, it didn't affect my enjoyment at all. I would like to point out that all the issues I talked about in my review for Elantris were improved upon greatly in this book. I wouldn't say it's my favorite book. Like, I wouldn't say the character work is on par with something like A Song of Ice and Fire, which is my favorite series right now. I would say this is a vast improvement over Elantris. This is a very enjoyable book. And if you're interested to get into fantasy, and if you're interested to start Brandon Sanderson, I would highly suggest you read this book. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. Yes, I enjoyed it quite a lot. As I said, it's not quite on that special level that the A Song of Ice and Fire books are for me, but still I think this is a great book. This is a very fun book. Yeah, the way the magic especially is implemented is really interesting. So if you have not read this book, I would highly suggest you do. I will go into spoilers for a while. So I will put up a timestamp right now when my spoiler part will end, so you can go over there if you have not read this book yet. But yeah, I will go into spoilers now. All right, let's talk a little bit about spoilers. So I want to talk about Vin's character, which I personally really, really liked. So in the beginning, I was a bit worried because although Win is 16, I had this kind of feeling that her actions, they seemed like she was younger than 16, but that was just something I had very early on, and that subsided very quickly. And I feel like most of her actions throughout the book are very plausible within her character. So we obviously see that she had this very hard childhood. She has this like really dark past. And I always like how she thinks about the certain actions that she's doing and how she decides what to do in certain situations. And I think all her inner thoughts that we get when we're in her head are quite interesting. I also like that she has this like issue where she can't trust even the people in this thieving crew that she sees like, yeah, they are better people than she actually used to know, but she's still not able to trust them fully. With that, I have a slight negative that when we meet Elend, she actually trusts him quite quickly, which I felt like was slightly out of character, but I feel like it kind of makes sense because it is the romance plot. But I feel like for the fact that we get all her like paranoid thoughts in all the previous chapters, it was a bit quick where she started trusting Elend. Even that was like, it was talked about in the book, like she herself was surprised that she opened up to Elend that quickly. Now, I would like to talk about Kelseys. So I have heard a lot of mixed stuff about Kelseys. Like a lot of people really love him as a character. Some people say he's not a good character. So what I personally would say, I would say he is probably not the best person. I feel like his intentions are probably good, but he is also fueled by revenge, and a lot of the things he does are quite questionable. So for me personally, I always found him to be a very intriguing character, but I also feel like he isn't necessarily a good person, but I would say he is a great character. His death in the end was very emotional and shocking. I was actually spoiled on the fact that he would die, and I still had a pretty emotional reaction to him dying, and I feel like the way it was done was quite shocking. I would actually like to read out that passage a little bit about it, because I feel like that was written incredibly well. So yeah, the situation is that the Lord Ruler has gotten out of his carriage, and Kelseys just fought and killed the Steel Inquisitor. And yeah, we get this passage. "I killed you once," the Lord Ruler said, turning back to Kelseys. "You tried," Kelseys replied, his voice loud and firm, carrying across the square. "But you can't kill me, Lord Tyrant. I represent that thing you've never been able to kill, no matter how hard you try. I am Hope." The Lord Ruler snorted in disdain. He raised a casual arm, then backhanded Kelsier with a blow so powerful that Wynne could hear the crack resound through the square. Kelsier lurched and spun, spraying blood as he fell. As I said, I was spoiled on the fact that Kelsier would die in this book, but the fact that he died in this way was quite shocking still, and I personally was still surprised that it would happen, because when I went into this book, I went with the mindset that Kelsier would not die, despite the fact that I was told he would, because the way I was told, it could have been basically a prank. But yeah, I was kind of thinking like maybe he won't die. But then early on, I was like, okay, the way his character is, it would make quite a lot of sense for him to die. I personally, was still quite shocked, despite the fact I was spoiled on it. But I personally feel like this was such a strong scene, and it basically showed us what Kelsier's character is. It really highlights this like complex part of his character, that despite the fact that he is actually doing some bad things, like he is ready to kill people. He has this very classist mindset that anybody who is part of the nobility cannot be a good person, but still he has all of these thoughts that he have a very well-developed reason within his life. So for me personally, he's a very intriguing and complex character. I wouldn't say he's a good person, but I personally really like him as a character. I found him very intriguing, and I feel like this last sentence that I read, "But you can't kill me, Lord Tyrant. I represent that thing you've never been able to kill, no matter how hard you try. I am hope." This just shows, like, especially after we know the revelation of what his plan was throughout, that he was planning to sacrifice himself for the cause. It actually shows, like, despite the fact that his actions aren't necessarily good, his intentions are very good, at least in theory. And for me personally, so I really like Wynne's character. I really like Kelsier's character. And for that reason, I also really, really like the relationship we got between Wynne and Kelsier. We get this master-apprentice relationship between Wynne and Kelsier, which I personally really enjoyed from the start. I feel like the way it was developed from beginning to end was quite good. I feel like in the beginning, where Kelsier is training Wynne to be a Mistborn, is quite interesting, and I loved those passages. But later on, when Wynne is pushing back against Kelsier, when she's trying to convince him that not everybody who is noble is a bad person, I feel like that there was a lot of development in between, and I feel like the fact that Wynne was able to change Kelsier's mindset somewhat was really, really interesting, and I would think it was done very, very well. And that's why I personally feel like the character work, especially for the two main characters in this book, was so much stronger than what Sanderson did in Elantris, that I personally really loved the characters and their relationship in this book. What I didn't like somewhat is the fact that the side characters didn't get as much development. So I feel like the side characters were very, very fun. I personally really liked Sazed, Ham, and Breeze. But for me personally, I feel like they could have gotten a bit more of development throughout the book, but that's also something that maybe could happen in the follow-up books, because obviously this book was very, very focused on Wynne and Kelsier. So maybe in the sequels we will get more development from the side characters, but still, despite the fact that they didn't have a lot of development, I really like them. Especially Sazed, I think, is a really cool character that has a lot of potential to grow in the next few books. And one thing more I want to point out is the Lord Ruler, who is a very ominous character. Despite the fact we don't ever get to see him on screen interacting with our main characters, he has this like ominous presence that is present in the whole book, which is really, really interesting. And despite the fact that we don't see a lot of him, he still feels like a really great villain, just because of the fact about how this world is that he essentially built up. And I feel like personally the revelation towards the end regarding his identity was really interesting, because we had these, like, before every chapter we had this small passage that the Hero of Ages wrote, that the prophesized hero who was supposed to save the world, but we end up realizing that actually that hero wasn't the Lord Ruler. I feel like that's something that we might go deeper into in the next few books. I really like that revelation, that we were thinking throughout the book that the Lord Ruler wrote these like small journal entries that we saw in before all the chapters, but in the end it turned out that it actually wasn't the Lord Ruler. What I personally really would like to point out is how great these magic systems are and how well they're developed. So personally, I really liked it. So these are the first like hard magic systems I'm reading where we are actually getting all these rules. And I personally feel like, yes, maybe it could be dry to read these rules-based magic systems, but I've personally really enjoyed it. Especially Allomancy, I feel like has some really, really cool features, but despite the fact that it was explained quite well, we still have this enough mystery to make it still intriguing. Like we have this mystery about the 11th metal. We have the fact that gold seems like something that doesn't really, it doesn't make sense what kind of power it actually gives you. So I feel like there is this whole like thing about the higher metals that can be explored later on, which I think makes this magic system quite interesting. And I also really liked Furukami, which I hope that's how it's pronounced. I think the fact that you can store these different attributes in a metal is a really neat idea, and I feel like it opens up a lot of potential uses later on as we find out more about the Terrace culture. I feel like this is something that we can dive deeper into in the follow-up books. So these higher metals that we don't really know what they do, I think will be really interesting to figure out what these higher metals are and how they're linked and what powers they give the Mistborn that is using those metals. Another thing I would like to talk about is the whole like Marsh, Mare, and Kelseys dynamic that was hinted at in this book. So essentially, Mare was Mare was Kelseys' wife, but there are hints in this book that actually Kelseys' brother Marsh was also in love with Mare, and I was expecting like some kind of a revelation that we find out who actually betrayed Kelseys, because I felt like everybody thought it was Mare, but I thought there will be a different person who will be revealed as the betrayer later on. But in the end, it seemed like it would be nobody. Like Wynne kind of convinced Kelseys that it was actually just a trick by the Lord Ruler, and actually Mare and nobody else actually betrayed him. And I was a bit let down by that. Like, I understand that it's a really cool thing for Kelseys to kind of move on from that and have this whole, like, yeah, I wasn't betrayed for his character, but I felt like it was something that was built up but not really paid off. So I'm not sure if this will play into something in the next books. But yeah, I personally really liked the whole dynamic, and I theorized a lot about what actually happened. At one point, I actually even said that I think maybe Sazed was the betrayer. I don't know if that's true. I guess it's not true. I don't think Sazed is that kind of a character. But like, yeah, when I first was thinking about this thing, I was theorizing a lot, like who in this group could be the person who would betray Kelseys. And I was a bit let down that it didn't actually play into anything. Another great thing I really, really liked about this book is all the action sequences. I loved Kelseys' first attacks on the nobility. I feel like were really cool to show what different things a Mistborn can do. Then we had the Kelseys Wynne training sessions, which I personally really, really liked. Those were some of my favorite scenes in this book. I really liked the scene where they have this like pushing contest where they are both pushing on this coin, and Kelseys kind of realizes that Wynne is actually a lot more powerful than he actually thought. Yeah, I personally really liked those training sessions. I really enjoyed the Mistborn fight between Wynne and Shan Ilariel, which was really, really cool. In the beginning, when Adium was actually discussed, I was like, oh, this opens up a lot of different battle opportunities between two Mistborn, and I feel like that fact really came out in the Wynne and Shan fight. Then the fight between Kelseys and the Inquisitor was also really good, where Kelseys was just on fire, where he was just essentially burning all metals at the same time and just confusing this Inquisitor, and actually managed to kill the Inquisitor. And then the whole final 60-70 pages was crazy. We get Wynne, who tries to kill the Lord Ruler multiple times and is arrested, and in the end she obviously is able to do it. That whole sequence was crazy, and I read the last 200 pages in like a few hours. I really, really loved that part. But I will go into that final part a bit more later on. Related to that, I would like to talk about some of the plot conveniences I mentioned in my spoiler-free part. So I personally think that the fact that it was revealed that Kelsey was planning this whole sacrificing himself was a bit convenient, because I personally felt like the fact that we were in Kelsier's head for a big part of this book and we didn't know anything about this plan of his was a bit weird. I have seen Brandon Sanderson's lecture about the heist thing, and where he said, yeah, it was kind of like cheating that he had Kelsier, that he had us be in Kelsier's point of view and still not know what his plan is. I was a bit surprised that it was revealed that way, but maybe it's just because usually when I read a book and I have a point of view of a certain character, I feel like we have everything we're seeing is basically the whole picture of what they're planning, but that wasn't the case here. So it felt a bit convenient, but it was a big surprise when it was revealed that this was his plan. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm a bit torn on that. But again, it didn't affect my enjoyment of the book. I felt a bit weird reading that. Yeah, why didn't I know anything, or weren't there any hints to this plan? Maybe it's also just that I didn't notice anything. Maybe if I reread this book, I will pick up on things that foreshadow the fact that this is his plan. But yeah, it felt a bit weird. Another thing I would say felt convenient was the fact that Marsh became an Inquisitor. Obviously, we had the whole fake out with Marsh being dead, and in the end it turns out he's an Inquisitor and he helps Wynne fight off the Lord Ruler and kill him essentially. But it seemed quite convenient that he would become an Inquisitor that quickly, and I also thought that Inquisitors need to be Mistborn, which Marsh is not. So I'm not sure what happened right there. It was a bit convenient, but in the moment I didn't think about that. Like, I was just reading and it blew my mind what was happening. And the last thing that I felt is convenient was the fact that when Wynne was captured by the Inquisitors and Sazed helps her escape, her clothes and her medals are just outside of the room that they were imprisoned in, and she can just get those medals and just start using Allomancy again, which felt a bit weird. Like, why would they just leave them right there? But again, you couldn't argue that they were pretty sure that there was no way Wynne could escape, so there is like a cop-out answer there. But I just felt like later on, like, this isn't something while I was reading, this is something like a few days after I was done, I was like, okay, that was a bit weird. But again, it didn't affect my enjoyment, but it is something that was slightly convenient and just, it wasn't talked about, but it did happen. So I want to talk a little bit about the romance plot in this book. So we had an interesting romance plot, in my opinion, between Wynne and Elend. I personally liked it. It was interesting without taking over the story. I would say that the romance between them moved a bit too fast. We saw like 1-2 different scenes with them at different balls, and then we have this time skip where they don't meet, and after that it seems like they're already a couple, which is a bit weird. Like, it seemed like some steps were skipped in that process. But I personally feel like, I'm not sure if it would have been better to give the romance more time, because I feel like then it would seem like it was too big of an aspect in the story. So I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I have to say I personally like Elend as a character. I feel like he can be an interesting character, and his relationship with his father, his thoughts about the Ska, and yeah, it was quite interesting to see him, and also like, yeah, to get this alternative point of view from somebody who is in the nobility and is still questioning the whole system that the Lord Ruler has built up. So it was interesting, but in terms of the romance, I liked the romance, but I feel like it was a bit quick. I feel like Elend is somebody who could be, I think he will be, and I think there is a lot of like potential for him to grow as a character and become a really cool main character in the future books, or in the sequels, which I will read soon. So I have actually a theory about Elend for Well of Ascension and Hero of Ages. So as far as we know, Elend is not an Allomancer, but I personally feel like now that Kelsier is dead and we don't have any Mistborn like on the team, that maybe Elend will turn out to be a Mistborn. Like, maybe he will snap in one of the follow-up books and end up being a Mistborn. That's just a small theory I have, because now obviously we are missing one Mistborn. We only have Wynn left as a Mistborn on the side of the thieving crew, so this will be interesting to see. What I was really surprised by in this book, but which I shouldn't have been probably, is the fact that the Lord Ruler was killed in this book. I was surprised at that. I thought that it would take the whole trilogy, but I also feel like it makes sense to kill him off in this book, because obviously there are hints that there is a bigger threat, this deepness that the Hero of Ages was supposed to fight, that obviously the Lord Ruler prevented him fighting, that would also be a focus of the future books, but I was still surprised that the Lord Ruler would die in this book. For the sequels, I have a few different questions. Number one, how will Elend's government work? And also, like, how will Elend be as a king? I was quite surprised that Elend was chosen to be the king. I'm not sure if they called him king, but yeah, let's just see how... I was surprised that the crew would actually trust Elend with this job, despite the fact that all of them had a few issues with the nobility. So it will be interesting to see how that will work out. Then obviously the whole warning that the Lord Ruler said before he died, like he said, you don't know what I do for you, you don't know what will happen if you kill me. And then after they killed them, obviously what I just said with the whole deepness thing, that maybe that will be a bigger problem than they actually thought. My biggest question is, does Wynn have more powers than we are aware of at the moment? So when Wynn kills the Lord Ruler, and when she pulls his arm braces away, it seems like she's able to affect the interior metals that the Lord Ruler has. I feel like we were told that Allomancy isn't actually able to, with Allomancy you can't affect metals that are inside a different Allomancer, but it seems like Wynn has that power, so maybe there is another, I know there were supposed to be multiple magic systems there, and I think there is a third one. I don't know if it's related to that, but it will be interesting to explore, what exactly happened there. And I feel like in the epilogue of this story, there was enough. So despite the fact that the main story that was built up in this book was ended, basically, I feel like there were enough hints in the epilogue that showed, yes, there is enough more material to dive into in the follow-up books, which I'm personally looking forward to quite a lot. So those were my questions for the sequels. So let's jump to my final thoughts. All right, everybody. So my final thoughts on The Final Empire. I personally really loved this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. As I already said, I think this is a really cool book. If you haven't read a lot of fantasy and are interested in reading fantasy, if you're interested in a hard magic system, and generally if you're interested in getting into Brandon Sanderson, this is a really, really good book to read. I personally really enjoyed it. I think the character work is really good. I think the world building and magic is really well thought out. And I feel like the plot is amazing. Obviously, Brandon Sanderson's plots are very intricate, and his last third of the book, which is called the Sanderlanche, is quite interesting. I personally really love this book. I would highly recommend anybody to read it. It is really fun, and yeah, I look forward to reading the sequels. I will jump into Well of Ascension. I'm not sure if I will do it in May or in June, but I am planning to jump into that one quite soon. And yeah, I personally think I'm sold on Brandon Sanderson. Obviously, I liked Elantris as well. Again, the Elantris review is linked in the info cards. But yeah, I personally think he improved vastly in this book. And the fact that a lot of people say that the Stormlight Archive is actually a lot better than the Mistborn series really has me intrigued to read more of his books in the Cosmere. Alright, this was my review for The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. I hope you liked this video. If you did, leave a like, leave a subscribe. Check out my other videos. Some of them should have showed up on the screen right now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.